If we want to truly regain the public's trust, we can provide greater accountability and transparency with a simple step. Let's start by communicating to our constituents about the votes we take. Facebook is really about communicating and telling stories. We think that people can really help spread awareness of organ donation and that they want to participate in this to their friends. And that can be a big part of helping solve the crisis that's out there. Before I lost my voice, it was slurred, so only those close to me could understand, but with the computer voice, I found I could give popular lectures. I enjoy communicating science. It is important that the public understands basic science, if they are not to leave vital decisions to others. It's not easy to run a social media account over a long period of time, but we love communicating with our fans every day and night. The drawing teacher has this problem of communicating how to draw by osmosis and not by instruction, while the physics teacher has the problem of always teaching techniques, rather than the spirit, of how to go about solving physical problems. Most of the time, I get auditions for deaf characters where the scene has them communicating in really convoluted ways, like reading lips from across the room when the other person's back is turned or having other people parrot what they say. Constantly talking isn't necessarily communicating. When you come in as a new leader, it's really important that people do get to know you and that you are constantly communicating. If we ever start communicating with living creatures from other planets, the number one priority is, how are you going to communicate information? Even between different cultures here on Earth, you get into communication problems. Without art, without communicating, we wouldn't live beyond 30 because we'd be so sad and depressed. Whatever the means of delivery, whatever the technological and corporate structures, music will always be about groups of talented individual performers communicating emotionally with individual fans. Social media can be dangerous. People hide behind their computers and write negative things, so I like to keep it about communicating with my fans. The events of my life are too unimportant, and have too little interest for any person not of my immediate family, to render them worth communicating or preserving. For nearly a century, the South made itself believe that Negroes and white people were really communicating. So convinced of this were the white Southerners that they almost made the nation believe that they, and only they, knew the mind of the Southern Negro. I think a lot of people overlook the importance of the menu as a marketing tool and a way of communicating to the customer what the ambition of their restaurant is. Not only the typeface and the design, but what is it printed on? Is it cheap looking? Is it the right kind of paper for that restaurant? With our work at Kazaa, we began seeing growing broadband connections and more powerful computers and more streaming multimedia, and we saw that the traditional way of communicating by phone no longer made a lot of sense. An important part of dating is communicating. We communicate by sharing our thoughts, ideas, and feelings. We enjoy being with someone when we have an easy time communicating or when we have a lot to talk about. Hopefully, if you create something fine, people will relate to it, so you're communicating with people, and you're not in a void. On the other hand, because you're always creating and transforming, art always separates you, always. And it's absolutely true that male sexual behavior and female responses to male demands change a lot when they start communicating, and the levels of the communication that I've seen on the ground in very, very poor areas are so high, and I think, why don't we have that here? Before September 11th there were weak procedures, willingness, and mechanisms for communicating among agencies for foreign intelligence and the FBI with its focus on law enforcement. The domestic versus foreign barrier has been solved by the reforms after September 11th that established the DNI. Even though stand-up seems like one-way conversation, if you're doing it right, it's actually a two-way discussion between the comic and the audience. The audience just happens to be communicating through laughter. I view music mostly as communication, so when I record, I'm communicating to the listener in the future. Maybe my way of communicating through sign made me more in tune with my body and how it moved. Who knows? I just know when I saw a stage for the first time, I wanted to be on it. George W. Bush was president through some of the darkest days of our history, and yet his optimism never waned. He is optimistic by nature, but he also understood the importance of always communicating a sense that things will get better. Peter Stoger is very, very inspirational, communicating a lot, being open and approachable for the players. I wish people who have trouble communicating would just shut up. When you are writing literary writing, you are communicating something subtextual with emotions and poetry. The prose has to have a voice, it's not just typing. It takes a while to get that voice. Despite all the technical improvements, it still boils down to a man or a woman and a microphone, playing music, sharing stories, talking about issues, communicating with an audience. I think art is communication. To that extent, it can be the words between the words. It has a possibility of communicating something more than people can do with prose or just talking. I speak on stage to try to establish some method of communication. The songs are supposed to be a way of communicating, but speech and drinks and sometimes chocolates are also a way of communicating. All politics to me, Indian or white, is an illusion preventing us from being authentic because we're communicating through something that isn't real to us. Ideas are cheap. Always be passionate about ideas and communicating those ideas and discoveries to others in the things you make. I guess the two Manifesto, Communicating Vessels, Mad Love, and some of his poetry made a significant mark on me, but as far as bringing a literary element into the music, I see it as a much broader assimilation. So that's my main role right now, and really the politics also includes going out and communicating to the world why Apache is a good thing, why companies should be involved in it, and why individuals should be involved in it too. So technologies, whether it is a telephone or an iPhone, computers in general or automobiles, television even, all individualize us. We all sit in front of our iPhones and communicating, but are we really communicating? Acting is about communicating, reacting, and sharing, and friendship is about all of those things, too. I think human beings thrive on communication, and pubs and restaurants are a great way of communicating, a great way of enjoying each other. Music is not supposed to be nationalist. It is supposed to surpass language barriers. It is about generations communicating with each other. It is a fine line between communicating and being too chummy. My players, when I've been promoted, have been upset by top-flight refs being mates with opposition players. Dance and acting are different. One is about being as close to reality and convincing the camera of the emotion that you portray, the other is communicating subjects and legends of a different time. The aesthetic of architecture has to be rooted in a broader idea about human activities like walking, relaxing, and communicating. Architecture thinks about how these activities can be given added value. One question about a joke is, how well is the strangeness of the situation resolved? At The New Yorker, we retain a lot of incongruity, tapping the playful part of the mind, Monty Python type stuff. We also try to use humor as a vehicle for communicating ideas. Not editorial comment, but observation. Music is powered by ideas. If you don't have clarity of ideas, you're just communicating sheer sound. I see a lot of people on Twitter that are providing information, communicating, sometimes setting the record straight. Generally, it can be a very good thing. I'm not an academic, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a writer, communicating ideas to the public. There is a model of how the past is, and a lot of academic archaeology is about refining the model. It's not about changing the model radically. I'm not aware of any current which is about radically changing the model. It's just me, really. Something people say about acting is that acting is listening. But I think that writing is listening, too. That you really have to listen to what are they saying and what they're communicating to you. And so, a lot of it is just getting stuff down. Do I get grief for the fact that in communicating, say, about the baboons I'm doing so much anthropomorphizing? One hopes that the parts that are blatantly ridiculous will be perceived as such. I've nonetheless been stunned by some of my more humorless colleagues, to see that they were not capable of recognizing that. The digestive canal represents a tube passing through the entire organism and communicating with the external world, i.e. as it were the external surface of the body, but turned inwards and thus hidden in the organism. Communicating a passionate response to world events is no longer limited to protests and rallies. The sad fact is that the same terrorist scenarios, if they occurred in 5 different states, there could be 5 different sets of responses to the American people. We need, at a minimum, a level of coordination on communicating threats to the public. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.